I went to lunch at my favorite restaurant during my work break, as I did every Friday, without telling anyone, as a little secret ritual that only I knew about. It was the only time of the week when I allowed myself to stop, breathe and remember who I was before I was tired, before the routine, before I had to carry on my shoulders the responsibility of keeping everything going. The restaurant was simple, but there was something comforting about the food, about the way the waiters recognized me, as if that place was silently telling me, "Here, you are still seen." Little did I know that it would be precisely there that I would stop being blind. That day, something changed in the air before I even walked through the door. A subtle, uncomfortable, almost childish intuition. I walked in and stopped on the first step. My eyes scanned the room out of habit, but froze in the next instant. She was there. She, sitting across from a man who wasn't me. They were both laughing, leaning toward each other, as if the rest of the world didn't exist. She took his hand. She touched his arm. She looked at him the same way she once looked at me. It was as if the air left the entire room, and the world went silent for a few seconds. My heart didn't race, it stagnated. I stood still for a few moments, as if my body was still struggling to process what had happened. I didn't scream, I didn't run, I didn't make a fuss. I just watched. A man becomes a rock in those moments. Hard on the outside, shattered on the inside. I thought about going to the table, saying something, facing them both, breaking plates if necessary. But deep down, I knew it wasn't worth it. Cheating people aren't shaken by the truth, only by exposure. I walked over to them without thinking, stopped next to the table, and looked into her eyes for 2 seconds. She froze. But I just smiled with my mouth, without smiling with my eyes, and turned around. I left the restaurant and took a photo from afar, as if freezing that moment in time, so she could never pretend it didn't happen. I was going to show the photo at home. And that was it. From that moment on, it would no longer be my voice that would speak for me, it would be my silence. That night, when I came home, she was lying on the couch, unassuming, as if everything was as it had always been. I showed her the photo without saying a word. She turned pale. Her lips trembled. She tried to laugh. She said it was a business meeting, that the man was a client, that there was an explanation. But the lie no longer fit her face. Or my life. She knew it was too late. And so did I. There was something broken there that would no longer hold together. I told her I knew everything, that she didn't need to explain herself. I simply said, "You chose. Now I will choose too." In the days that followed, she tried. She tried to fix it, she tried to apologize, she tried to seduce me, she tried to remind me of everything we had built. But there was nothing left between us but ruins. And I didn't want to build on top of that rubble. Betrayal doesn't just hurt because of the image of someone else's body with someone else. It tears you apart because it destroys what you believed about yourself. I felt ridiculous, stupid, deceived, a clown who didn't notice his own circus was on fire. I spent sleepless nights reliving every moment I trusted her, every conversation, every kiss, every "I love you," that now seemed like a farce. My body was still at home, but my soul was wandering between the past and shame. But it was the next day, when my daughter called me into her room, that everything changed. Her eyes were red, her mouth tight, and she said to me, "Dad, I saw the picture. I heard the argument. I heard everything. I want to live with you." It was like a light at the end of a tunnel. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't choose sides out of anger, but out of awareness. She simply said, "I love Mommy," but she chose something that destroyed our home. "And you've always been here. Always." That broke me. For the first time in days, I really cried. Because I understood that despite everything, there was still something real there. There was someone who saw me. From that moment on, everything took on a new meaning. Cheating wasn't just about me anymore. It was about our family. It was about what you lose when you cheat. Your home, your respect, the trust of those who have known you since you were little. I went through the separation process. I left home for a few days and lived in a small rented apartment. And my daughter came with me. She made breakfast for the two of us, telling us that we could decorate it our way, that we could learn to be happy there, even with everything different. Every gesture she made was a bandage on a wound that was still bleeding. And in the meantime, the house that was once our home became a labyrinth of silence. She was no longer smiling like she had in the restaurant. Her lover had never returned. She sent me messages, tried to arrange meetings, said she regretted it, that it wasn't love, that it was a mistake, that she felt empty. But I didn't respond. Because what sustained me now was no longer the desire to go back. It was the desire to move forward. I needed to find myself outside of her. Over time, I met other people. I met someone who listened to me with his eyes. Who didn't make me feel like I had to compete with the past. Who didn't look at me as a betrayed man, but as a man who had survived. And one day, while we were in a park, my daughter held my hand and said, "Dad, I think you're smiling again." And she was right. I no longer laughed out of obligation, or to hide the pain. I laughed because it finally didn't hurt anymore. Meanwhile, my ex-wife lost more than she thought. She lost the partner who never stopped trying. She lost the love of her daughter who no longer hated her, but saw her with open eyes. She lost the certainty that she could make mistakes without consequences. And, most of all, she lost the version of herself that still inspired respect. But what she did in the end, when she realized all was lost, still haunts me. She showed up at my apartment door on a rainy night, soaking wet, shaking, and told me something that still resonates within me today. Something that made my daughter get up from the couch and listen to it all. Something that forever changed the way I understood pain, forgiveness, and the end of a love. And it's that last revelation that explains everything, why she cheated, why she did that to me, and why, even so, there's still something inside me that remembers her, and it hurts. Because sometimes, the greatest betrayal isn't the one you commit against another body, but the one you commit against yourself. And when she said what she said that night, I finally understood. But was it too late? Welcome to the channel. Here, we make it clear, we do not support any kind of betrayal. All the stories you hear are fictional, created to show how infidelity can destroy homes, break hearts and change destinies forever. Brace yourself. What follows is a story shocking, intense and unforgettable. Good listening. Daniel and Clara's story began so naturally that no one, not even them, noticed when it went from being a casual crush to becoming an intertwined life. They met at the end of college, when youth still carried that air of infinite possibility and the world seemed to fit into their plans. He was a discreet man, with a look that conveyed serenity and a way of listening that made anyone feel important. She was intense, determined, with a vibrant smile that seemed to light up the darkest corners of any room she entered. Together, they formed a couple that inspired admiration, the kind that seemed to complement each other effortlessly, as if each of their features had been molded to fit the other. People said they were living proof that true love still existed. They believed it themselves. They built their lives around the idea of partnership. Daniel was pursuing a stable career as a financial analyst at a medium-sized company. He worked hard, but not excessively, seeking a balance between professional demands and dedication to his family. Clara, who had a degree in public relations, had a more restless spirit. She worked as an image consultant for freelancers and small business owners. Working remotely gave her a certain amount of freedom with her schedule, which made her more present at home, at least physically. Their home reflected this, a serene, organized environment, with touches of personality in the walls painted in sober tones, in the carefully chosen paintings and in the travel photos that testified to their years of complicity. The couple's daughter, Sophia, was the center of gravity in the house. At 14, she was moving between adolescence and the sweetness of childhood. She had her father's eyes and her mother's strong temperament. Intelligent, sensitive and perceptive, Sophia always noticed more than she let on. Daniel was a present, patient father, the kind who knew the teachers' names, attended school meetings and knew exactly how to calm an emotional crisis with a hug at the right moment. Clara, in turn, had an intense relationship with her daughter, sometimes sweet, sometimes stormy. The two argued like sisters, but all it took was a gesture, a look, and everything was forgiven. There was love in that house. An everyday love, made up of small kindnesses, improvised dinners with music in the background, lazy Sundays watching series on the couch. The routine, with its predictable rhythms, had become firmly established over the last few years. Daniel left for work early and returned home around 7 in the evening. Clara took care of her daughter's commitments and her own clients, alternating busy days with lighter ones. They had dinner together almost every night, and although their conversations were not always long or deep, there was a sense of mutual security. Clara would sometimes get lost in her own thoughts during meals, and Daniel, always respectful, never pressured her. He had learned, over time, that she needed her space as much as he needed the stability she represented. They supported each other as best they could. Even if the passion of the early years had given way to a softer love, there was a certain care in the way they treated each other, a respect built over time and effort. Clara liked to walk alone at dusk. She said it helped her organize her thoughts, but she never explained which thoughts. Daniel didn't ask. He trusted her. There was a kind of silent contract of loyalty between them, signed not by words but by repeated gestures over time. He would wait for her to return from her walks with dinner warmed up in the oven and a glass of wine on the counter. She would smile, thank him, sometimes kiss him on the forehead, sometimes just sit in silence, but he didn't complain. She knew that love also meant allowing the other person to be silent. Despite appearances, Clara lived moments of inner restlessness. There were days when she looked in the mirror and no longer recognized that woman with tired eyes. Time passed, her youth faded, and even though she had a solid family, a healthy daughter and a kind husband, there was a growing emptiness inside her, as if something was missing that she could not name. Work gave her autonomy, but not passion. Her conversations with Daniel were calm, but rarely deep. She tried to ignore this feeling, occupying herself with Sophia, with clients, with the house, but on quieter nights, she was invaded by a diffuse melancholy that made her question the life she led. She never told anyone about it. It was something too intimate to share. Daniel, in turn, also had doubts. Not about Clara, but about himself. As the years went by, he felt increasingly overshadowed by a kind of emotional invisibility. It was as if everything he did went unnoticed, as if the love he offered had become a duty. There was no ingratitude on Clara's part, but there was distance. Small absences accumulated. A glance that was diverted, a touch that was missing, a conversation that was postponed. He didn't complain, because he believed that long-term relationships had these phases. It never crossed his mind to give up. He was there, firm, because that was what real men did, they stayed. Even when emotions were mixed, even when the return didn't come as expected. For Daniel, commitment was more than pretty words in wedding vows, it was presence. Sophia observed everything with the attentive gaze of someone who grows up surrounded by silence. She noticed that her parents no longer laughed together as they used to. She felt the difference in the atmosphere in the house, in the way their hugs had become more formal. She loved them both, and so she adapted. She tried to keep them connected with small initiatives, she invited them to watch movies, organized simple dinners, created excuses to be together. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But even so, she didn't give up. One night, during a conversation in the car, Clara looked at her daughter with a vague expression and said, "Sometimes, I wish I could live another life, you know." Sophia didn't answer. She remained silent, watching her mother through the window. She kept that sentence to herself, not knowing exactly what to do with it. Over time, she noticed that her mother smiled more on her cell phone than when talking to her father. That their walks became more frequent. That there was always an excuse to go out. But she didn't judge. She just observed. Sophia had learned, before her time, that adults didn't always know how to deal with their own choices. In the midst of all this, Daniel remained faithful to his routine. He continued to believe in the love they had built. He made plans, saved money for a family trip he had wanted to take for a long time. He dreamed of taking them to Tuscany, reliving the romanticism that now seemed dormant. He was far from realizing that his dreams were heading in the opposite direction to the hidden desires of the woman he loved so much. The life of the three of them remained in a tenuous balance, sustained by appearances and goodwill. But cracks were appearing, imperceptible to the naked eye, but lethal in the structure of any relationship. The house remained silent. Laughter no longer echoed as before. Birthdays became brief dinners. Anniversaries, bureaucratic tasks. And yet, everyone believed they were fine. Maybe because admitting otherwise was too painful. Because looking head-on at what is falling apart requires a courage that one does not always have. Because sometimes the idea of love is more comfortable than real love. But like every story that seems perfect on the outside but empty on the inside, there was something to come. Something Daniel didn't expect. Something Clara didn't plan for. Something Sophia would never forget. And it would be at that moment that all the certainties built up over the years would be challenged, and the image of that family, so full of apparent harmony, would fall apart in a single moment. A moment that would change everything. Clara started going out more often. At first, it was for professional meetings, lunches with clients, networking events that seemed indispensable, and Daniel, as always, understood. He trusted her, not only because he wanted to trust her, but because there was nothing in their history together that made him suspicious. In his eyes, Clara was an independent woman, dedicated to her career and family. He admired that strength, even when she became distant. In the last few months, she seemed more animated, more alive in a way that was hard to explain. She would come home with her eyes shining, with a lightness that he hadn't seen for a long time. Daniel believed that it was just a new professional phase, perhaps some project that motivated her. He never wanted to keep an eye on her. He loved freely. But freedom, when it is not reciprocated, becomes a trap. Sophia, on the other hand, began to notice things. The silent intuition of children is rarely wrong. She noticed her mother's delays, her restrained smiles, her vacant looks. She also noticed that her father was quieter, more immersed in his own thoughts. Sometimes she would see him sitting on the porch at night, staring into space with a full glass of wine. He didn't drink much. He only drank when I needed to fill some inner silence. And Clara, when she arrived late, would pass by him with a hurried kiss on the head, always with some excuse. Daniel would respond with a gentle smile, but the smile never reached his eyes. He didn't say anything, but kept everything inside. Like someone who piles up small sorrows in an invisible corner of his soul. One afternoon, when she returned from a doctor's appointment, Clara left her unlocked cell phone in the living room. Sophia, upon noticing a persistent message notification, ended up reading what she shouldn't have. The content was ambiguous, but enough to understand that something was out of place. There were nicknames, veiled promises, and a photo of hands clasped on a bar table. The girl said nothing at the time. Her stomach churned and she went upstairs to her room without making a sound. She didn't know how to deal with it. She didn't want to believe it. She didn't want to take sides. She just cried in silence, as those who love more than they understand do. When Clara realized her cell phone was missing and ran downstairs, Sophia had already tidied the living room, and nothing was said. But inside her, something changed. Daniel kept trying to keep things going. He arranged a special dinner on a Friday night. He said he wanted to spend some time with Clara, just the two of them. She accepted, but then postponed it at the last minute. He said she had been invited to a last-minute event, something important for a strategic client. She apologized and promised to reschedule. He smiled, nodded, and pretended not to care. But that night, he didn't eat. He didn't turn on the television. He didn't read. He just sat on the couch, staring at the reflection of the lamplight in the window. A distorted reflection, like what his marriage was becoming. The absences began to have a scent, tone, volume. Clara wore new perfumes. He came back with his hair messed up in a different way. Her eyes often avoided Daniel's. She tried to keep up with her routine, still doing the housework, participating in conversations with her daughter, organizing dinners. But there was a mismatch in her gestures. Everything seemed mechanized. Her body was there, but her mind and heart were somewhere else. And Daniel began to feel this irreversibly. Not because he wanted to suspect, but because love, even when hurt, still notices what is hidden behind the silences. Sophia became closer to her father. They spent more time together on the weekends, preparing breakfast, and going for short walks. Clara noticed this growing bond, but she didn't intervene. Maybe out of guilt, maybe out of distraction. Sometimes she seemed too immersed in her own conflicts to notice what was going on around her. At other times, she observed the complicity between the two with a sparkle in her eyes that oscillated between admiration and sadness. It was as if she herself no longer knew where she belonged. It was a cloudy Tuesday when everything started to fall apart. Daniel had forgotten his wallet at work and had to go out during his break to get it. He took the opportunity to have lunch alone at the restaurant he had been going to for years, the place he always used as a refuge. He arrived without rushing, greeted the waiters familiarly and chose a table in the back, as he always did. But before he even sat down, something caught his attention. He saw a woman with her back to him, her hair tied up casually, wearing a blouse he had bought himself. The man in front of him was smiling, leaning towards her familiarly. Their hands were touching. Her laughter was free, something he had not heard at home for a long time. Her body froze. Her mind tried to deny it, searching for explanations, possibilities, anything other than the obvious. But there was no denying it anymore. It was her. Clara. Smiling at another man in a restaurant where he had always been happy to be alone. The blood seemed to freeze inside her chest. She felt her hands tremble, her throat dry. But she didn't move. He watched for minutes, maybe seconds that seemed like an eternity. And then, in a sudden impulse, he walked to the table. He stopped next to the two of them. Clara saw him. Her gaze lost, the color in her face drained. The man stood still, not understanding. Daniel didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just looked. Then he turned around and left the restaurant. No words. No shouts. No audience. Outside, he took his cell phone out of his pocket. He took a single photo. The two of them sitting, smiling, hands clasped. That was enough. He got in the car and drove aimlessly for almost an hour. He didn't cry. He didn't turn on the radio. He didn't think about confrontations. He just felt his body fluctuate between anger and disbelief. His mind revisited every conversation, every kiss from the last few months, trying to find the exact point at which everything began to go wrong. But there was no milestone, no sudden break. It was like a cracked glass, which gradually leaks until it's empty. That night, Clara arrived home earlier than usual. Daniel was waiting for her sitting on the porch. There was no anger on his face. Just tiredness. She tried to act natural, asked about his day, as if everything was still okay. He didn't answer right away. He just showed her the photo on his cell phone. The image imposed itself. Clara turned pale. Her lips moved to say something, but no words came out coherently. She tried to laugh. She said it was a casual lunch. A client. A coincidence. But Daniel no longer believed her. And worst of all, he no longer cared what she would say. He just said that now he knew. And that he had already made his decision. He got up, went into the house and left her outside. For the first time, she had nowhere to hide. Later, while Clara was climbing the stairs with tears in her eyes, Sophia was coming down with a small suitcase in her hand. She stopped in front of her mother, looked into her eyes for several seconds and said calmly, "Today I'm going to sleep at Dad's house. And tomorrow too." She didn't shout. She didn't make a fuss. She just said it. And Clara understood. Something inside her broke. She tried to tell her she loved her, tried to hold out her hand, but her daughter didn't react. She just went downstairs and left. The door closed behind her with the sound of a cycle ending. Inside Daniel's apartment, silence reigned. Sophia put her suitcase in the bedroom and returned to the living room. He was still sitting, motionless. She approached, sat next to him and, after a long time, just rested her head on her father's shoulder. He closed his eyes. He took a deep breath. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to cry. But she still needed to know why all of this happened. The reason behind the betrayal. The secret that Clara was carrying. And that was yet to be revealed. On Saturday morning, Clara appeared at the door of the apartment where Daniel now lived with Sophia. Her eyes were a mixture of guilt and despair, her makeup was smeared and her hair was tied up in a hurry, as if she had spent the night awake reliving mistakes she would rather erase. Daniel hesitated before opening the door, but he did. Not for her, but because Sophia, from the hallway, was watching in silence. Clara entered without asking permission, her eyes scanning the room as if searching for fragments of what had once been hers. The silence hung between them, thick, until she said she needed to talk, that there was something he didn't know, something that would change everything. Daniel remained standing, his arms crossed, his heart restless, showing nothing. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began. She said she wasn't going to justify herself, because she knew that betrayal can't be explained, but that there were layers behind what he saw. That the man he found her with wasn't just any stranger. He was someone who had been part of their lives, even before Sophia was born. Daniel narrowed his eyes. He felt a chill invade the back of his neck. He asked in a low, almost cutting voice if she was saying what he imagined. Clara nodded, tears starting to build up. She said that the man was someone from the past, an unresolved chapter of her youth, someone for whom she once felt an intense passion, but that never came to fruition. At the time, she had chosen to stay with Daniel because he represented stability, trust, love. But even so, that name never completely left her mind. Daniel took a step back, as if he needed space to keep breathing. Clara then confessed that, a few months earlier, she had met this man again by chance, at a professional event. He recognized her, struck up a conversation, and what should have been a cordial reunion turned into a succession of messages, coffees and meetings that got out of control. But until then, there was nothing new. Daniel already knew. What he didn't know, and what would become the secret that would unravel everything, was that Clara hadn't started it. It wasn't fate, it wasn't just any coincidence. The truth was harsher. Sophia entered the room without being called, her eyes tense. She wanted to listen. She wanted to understand. Clara hesitated, looked at her daughter, then at Daniel, and finally revealed herself. She said that the one who set it all up was the sister of the man she had gotten involved with. A woman who had known Clara for years, who knew about the old unresolved story, and who, out of personal interests and old resentments, planned that reunion as a trap. She said that this woman, upon discovering that Clara felt lost, that she was emotionally distant, that she was searching for something unnamed, offered help. "You need to find yourself again, you need to allow yourself to feel again," those were her words. And Clara, weakened, gave in. She didn't seek. She was sought. But what made it all the more disturbing was the next piece of truth. Daniel sat down, his body tense. Clara looked at Sophia, then looked away. She said that during their first dates, even before any physical involvement, she already knew she was being watched. That her lover himself had warned her, weeks later, that there were cameras in the restaurant, photos being taken, videos being stored by someone close to him. She said that everything was being documented, and that at some point, she would be blackmailed with those images. But that wasn't what scared her. What dismantled her was knowing that the person who did it all, who planned every detail and set up the situation for Daniel to see, for her daughter to find out, was Clara's own best friend, someone who frequented their house, who played with Sophia at Sunday lunches, who said she admired their marriage. Daniel stood up slowly, his eyes fixed on her, trying to put the pieces together. She continued. She said that this friend, years ago, had been rejected by him in a brief flirtation, when he didn't even know Clara yet. One night, one conversation, and a respectful no. But for that woman, that was a humiliation. And years later, when she saw the happy couple, Clara happily married, Sophia growing up with love, something awakened in her. A cold hatred, disguised by smiles, that transformed into a silent plan of destruction. She brought Clara back to her old love with clear intentions, disguised as friendship, using her friend's weaknesses as tools. And when Clara fell, when she gave in, she just waited for the right moment for everything to be seen. Sophia put her hand over her mouth. Daniel felt his legs weaken. He said he remembered the woman, that there really was a time when she had made advances and he had kindly not responded. But he would never have imagined that something so old could trigger such revenge. Clara was crying, her face contorted. She said that yes, she had made bad choices, that she could have said no, that she should have told him everything before. But she also said that she had been used, manipulated, put in a vulnerable position by someone who called herself a friend, who knew her weaknesses and used them with surgical precision. Daniel closed his eyes. His head was spinning. He didn't know what was worse, knowing that Clara had cheated on him with someone from the past or knowing that it was all a show, a performance designed to destroy him. And the cruelest thing was realizing that, at the center of it all, was their daughter. Sophia, still standing, said that she didn't know who to believe anymore. That the pain was so great that it couldn't fit in anymore. But then, in an unexpected gesture, she held her father's hand and said that, even with everything, she knew where love was. And that love was him. Clara tried to get closer. She begged for forgiveness. She said she was willing to cut any ties with the man, with her friend, with the past. That she wanted to rebuild her family, that she would do anything to regain Daniel and Sophia's respect. But there was no more room for promises. Daniel just looked at her and said that what she had destroyed was not just a marriage. It was the sacredness of home, the trust of his daughter, the safe silence of someone who believes he will be protected even when everything is falling apart. He said that forgiveness might be possible, but forgetting, never. And that he was no longer the same man. Because now, after everything, he knew exactly what he deserved. Sophia turned to her mother and said that, although she didn't hate her, she could no longer sleep under the same roof as her. That she needed time, distance, healing. Clara fell to her knees, trying to hold on to what was left. But everything had already been ripped away. She stood there, on the cold floor of the apartment, watching as father and daughter entered the room and closed the door. And in that moment, she understood that she had lost more than one man. She had lost her peace, her daughter's respect, and the only life where, despite everything, she was still loved. But what she didn't know was that destiny still had one last mirror in store for her. Something that would reveal, in an even more cruel way, the real price of each of her choices. In the week that followed, Clara seemed like a shadow of the days before. She walked as if floating, her body present and her soul lost. The messages she sent were long, pleading, filled with memories and promises. Daniel read them, but no word seemed enough. She didn't understand that when the bond is broken, it's not just what was done that hurts, it's everything it means. She had been an accomplice to a carefully orchestrated destruction, even if she had been ensnared by someone with bad intentions. No matter how much she had been manipulated, she had given in. And now, no matter how much she sought redemption, what remained was a hole between them where there had once been trust. Daniel began to change small things in the apartment. He bought new paintings, rearranged the furniture, and changed the sheets. It was his way of rebuilding. The marks of pain were still there, but he needed to redirect his story. Sophia helped him with everything. It was as if the two of them had silently sealed a pact of reconstruction. They had lighter nights, cooked together, and had marathons of old movies. But there was always a silence, the one that remains between the cracks in life after an earthquake. And that silence, as peaceful as it seemed, still carried the debris of what had happened. One afternoon, Sophia found Clara at the entrance to the building. She was standing there, not daring to go up, as if she were waiting for a miracle that would make her forgiven just for her desire. Her daughter hesitated, but went to her. The conversation they had there, under the mild sun of a late day, was tough. Clara said that she missed her, that she thought about her every second, that she accepted all the hate, as long as, one day, she could have a gesture of affection in return. Sophia listened to everything in silence. Then he said firmly that he did not hate her, but that now he saw everything differently. He said that he respected his mother's pain, but that he was on the side of those who remained, of those who never failed. Those words, spoken without rancor, were the hardest blow for Clara. She had lost the right to be her daughter's safe haven. And that, more than Daniel's absence, was what hurt the most. That same week, Daniel was invited to an event hosted by an old friend from university, a book launch. He was reluctant, but he ended up going. Sophia encouraged him. She told him he needed to live, meet new people, get out of that bubble of memories. At the event, he met faces from the past, forgotten smiles. And among them was Mariana, someone he had had a brief relationship with before meeting Clara. She was now an author, a single mother, and had gone through an equally traumatic divorce. They talked at length that night. About losses, new beginnings, wounds. And, for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt he could allow himself to look at someone without carrying the weight of comparison. Mariana didn't want to replace him, nor heal him. She just listened to him, and listened to him with presence. That was more comforting than he imagined possible. Meanwhile, Clara was immersed in a solitary attempt to start over. She cut ties with the friend who had betrayed her, blocked numbers, deleted messages, and distanced herself from her lover. She sought psychological help, trying to understand how she had allowed her neediness to speak louder than everything she had ever built. The pain of loss was beginning to transform into awareness, but this transformation was slow and heavy. There were nights when she would cry herself to sleep, holding one of the framed family photos that Daniel had not taken. It was her way of punishing herself, of reminding herself that, for a moment of illusion, she had sacrificed the truth of an entire life. Months passed. Sophia remained firm by her father's side, but now she also allowed small meetings with her mother, brief, tense, still far from the intimacy they once shared. Clara understood. And she accepted every limit, every silence, every absence. She no longer insisted. She knew that now, if anything was to come back, it would have to come from time and sincerity, not from desperation. One day, when he was picking up Sophia from school, Daniel ran into Clara in the parking lot. She just smiled, and they exchanged a restrained look. There was no longer any visible hurt, just a memory filled with everything that had been left unsaid. When Clara turned to leave, Daniel called her over. He said that, despite everything, he had learned a lot from what had happened. That he now saw how much he had neglected his own limits in order to keep something going on his own. He said he didn't hate her, but that he could no longer allow her to occupy a space that he didn't know how to take care of. Clara, with tears in her eyes, nodded. She said she didn't expect anything more. That she just wanted him to be happy, even if that meant excluding her. Those words, so raw and true, put an end to something that had been pending between them. For the first time, they were able to say goodbye without hatred. One autumn night, Daniel received an invitation from Mariana to an open-air concert. He accepted. It was cold, but pleasant. They sat side by side, and during a slow song, Mariana touched his hand. He didn't back away. He just looked at her and smiled. Sophia, upon learning of her father's departure, showed no resistance. She said that he deserved someone who would see him. And that if Mariana were that person, she would be happy for him. Daniel felt his chest warm. It was the first time since the betrayal that life seemed to be moving in another direction. Not as an escape, but as a choice. A conscious choice for peace. Meanwhile, Clara wrote letters that she never sent. She asked for forgiveness, explained her feelings, relived moments. It was her way of coping. She knew she had lost the chance to rewrite her story with Daniel. But, little by little, she began to get closer to herself. She stopped waiting, begging, and diminishing herself. She began to search for meaning beyond what she had lost. And it was in this silent reunion with her own essence that she began to truly change. One rainy morning, Sophia went to her old apartment. Clara opened the door in surprise. Her daughter came in, looked around and said that she had dreamed of her childhood. That, despite everything, she still loved that house. Clara smiled with teary eyes. They sat on the sofa and drank tea. Sophia said little, but enough. She said that it was still early to go back, but that she wanted to try. Clara didn't ask for more. She just thanked him, silently. That same morning, Daniel was walking with Mariana through a park. They talked about trips, projects, and everything they still wanted to experience. He still had scars, but he was no longer bleeding. He was present, available, and, above all, at peace. Life was slowly reorganizing itself. Not like before. Never like before. But in a new, truer way. And, deep down, maybe that was the only way to rebuild something after the fall. Not by erasing the past, but by learning to live with it without letting it define the future. Because there are pains that change us, losses that teach us, and choices that free us. Clara lost a lot. But Daniel, finally, found himself. The months that followed the revelation of the secret were silent, as if time had suspended the characters, each trying to breathe in a world where everything had changed. Daniel, although more serene, carried within himself a different outlook, more attentive, more cautious, as if he knew that life could change in the blink of an eye. He had not become bitter, but he had definitely stopped being naive. The peace he sought now was not made of comforting illusions, but of real presence, of whole truths. Mariana was part of this new reality, but without occupying forced spaces. She walked beside him lightly, as if she understood that one does not compete with ghosts, one only shares the present. And it was in this present that Daniel chose to be, one day at a time, feeling each small achievement as proof that it was still worth believing. Sophia, on the other hand, matured early. She became more introspective, less impulsive. She carried within her the wisdom of someone who had seen love fail and, even so, still believed in it. Her father's constant presence, Mariana's silent affection and her mother's restrained efforts now made up an emotional web more complex than any teenager should have to face. And yet, she managed to find balance. He spent the week with his father, but little by little he allowed his mother to participate in parts of his routine. Small coffees, quick visits, spaced conversations. It was like building a bridge over a river that still overflowed from time to time, but whose waters were beginning to recede. Sophia didn't want to erase the past, but she also didn't want to carry the mistakes of adults forever. Her choice was to live with discernment, forgiving little by little, with the care of someone who knows that some wounds should not be touched in a hurry. Clara continued her reconstruction process without fanfare. She no longer tried to get Daniel back, nor invade her daughter's space. She had accepted that forgiveness, when it comes, is not demanded, it is received. Over time, she realized that her search was never about that man from the past, nor about the friend who manipulated her. It was about herself. About a void that she herself had fed for years, believing that something external could fill it. Now she understood that nothing she had lost could be returned with words. It had to be earned through actions. And so, she dedicated herself to the essential, to be better. Not to impress, not to win him back, but because she finally understood her own value. She took care of her health, her mind, her home, the details that she had previously put off. She reorganized her finances, reevaluated her friendships, and abandoned ties that had previously made her feel important, but that in reality only reinforced her feeling of inadequacy. The moral complexity of what had happened still hung over everyone. Daniel sometimes found himself looking at an uncomfortable internal mirror. Even though he had been a victim of betrayal, he wondered if at some point he had also failed, if his overconfidence and his overly calm silence had not also, in a way, been fertile ground for Clara to lose herself. He never blamed himself, but he reflected. He questioned the details, the silences, the moments when he had failed to ask out of respect, but which had perhaps been interpreted as distance. Mariana listened to him in those moments without judgment. She knew that he was not looking for comfort, but for clarity. And it was in this search that Daniel grew stronger, understanding that relationships do not fall apart only because of great tragedies, but because of small cracks that are ignored every day. Clara now lived in another apartment, more modest and quieter. With the walls bare, she began to paint. He had never done this before, but he found in paint a form of expression that required no explanation. He painted loose lines, intense colors, illogical shapes. It was there, between brushstrokes, that she cried and smiled, all at the same time. Art gave her something that words could no longer, a safe space to be whole, without the weight of choices. Sometimes he would leave a canvas unfinished for days, as if waiting for time to show him the next step. Other times, he would paint compulsively, as if trying to tear the last fragments of guilt from his soul. He did not call himself an artist, nor did he think about selling anything. It was just his way of continuing. The moral dilemma weighing on everyone now was more subtle, but no less profound. Daniel wondered if he was ready to open his heart again, not out of fear of Mariana, but out of fear of himself. Would I be able to love wholeheartedly again? Or would I be forever fragmented, with parts inaccessible? Mariana, with her delicate patience, did not demand answers. She simply made herself present. And that, in itself, was a balm. Sophia, despite the lightness with which she dealt with both, still carried with her the duality of loving her parents and, at the same time, not wanting to repeat their story. She was afraid of trusting anyone too much in the future, afraid of being a reflection of what she had seen collapse. But, at the same time, she used this experience to shape a sense of self-awareness that was rare for her age. She knew what she wanted: truth, respect, presence. Clara faced herself every day. Now, more than anything, he fought against the tendency to justify himself. He understood that self-deception was his greatest enemy. There was no point in blaming others or hiding behind the pain. He needed to admit that he had failed. But by admitting it, he didn't need to condemn himself forever. The awareness of her mistake didn't make her a monster, but a woman in reconstruction. And this awareness made her more human. In her meetings with Sophia, she was clear, direct, without embellishments. She said that it still hurt, but that the pain now had a name and a place. That she was learning. And this, little by little, made room for something new. Not the same relationship they had before, but another one, more real, more adult, more cautious. One weekend, Daniel and Sophia traveled with Mariana to a house in the countryside. There, between light hikes, laughter on the porch and simple meals, something changed. There were no declarations, no promises. Just moments lived with ease. Daniel felt, for the first time, completely present. He realized that it was possible to smile without feeling guilty, that it was allowed to start another story. And Mariana, realizing this, simply held his hand at dusk and said that she was not there to fix anything, but to walk with him, if he wanted. He did not respond with words, but with a look that said more than any promise. When they got back, Sophia commented on how good she had felt during those days. He said that, even though he knew life would never be the same again, maybe it wasn't so bad. That it was like a tree that loses a branch in a storm and, over time, grows back in a different shape, perhaps more crooked, but still full of life. Daniel listened and smiled. He knew that this girl was becoming a woman with the strength of someone who has faced what many adults avoid. The routine returned, but it was no longer the same. The wounds healed with time, with choices, with care. There were no defined endings, nor promises of eternity. Only the awareness that moving forward is a daily decision, and that, even in the face of everything, love, when it exists, finds ways to survive. Not the idealized love, but the one built in everyday life, with real choices, with pain faced, with truths told. Time followed its course. And in every gesture, in every respected silence, in every sincere look, there was preparation for a dignified, true and, above all, transformative ending. Because there was something about to happen, something that would end that story with the strength of a definitive lesson. Something that would show that, despite all the pain, living truthfully is still the only possible path. On a sultry late afternoon, with the sky covered by heavy clouds and a warm wind sweeping the sidewalks, Clara found herself standing in front of a shop window where mannequins were wearing clothes she would never wear today. They were vibrant, bold pieces that might once have made sense, but now seemed to belong to another woman, a version of herself that no longer existed. She stood there for minutes, observing the reflection of her face mixed with the still dolls, and thought about how life had undone her plans with almost cruel precision. She no longer lamented with despair, but there was something in the way time passed that left her with the feeling that she needed to do something meaningful with what was left. When she walked away from the shop window, the phone rang. It was Sophia. Her daughter wanted to stop by the studio where Clara had been working. The girl's voice was calm but direct, and there was a neutrality in it that Clara had already learned to interpret as forced maturity. He smiled as he accepted the invitation, feeling that small gesture like a spark of something that could perhaps still blossom. Hours later, sitting in front of an unfinished canvas, Clara showed Sophia the painting she had been working on for weeks. It was made up of abstract lines, with layers of overlapping colors and a red line that ran across the entire canvas, from top to bottom, like a scar. Sophia remained silent, observing. Clara explained, in a low voice, that line was like the choice that separated her from what she was and what she was still trying to be. Sophia did not respond immediately. But then she came closer, touched her fingers to the line and said that everyone had one. It was just that some people chose to hide it and others, like her, made it obvious. Clara smiled, not knowing if that was a compliment or an accusation. Deep down, she understood that the two things could coexist. Sophia asked if she still spoke to that woman, the supposed friend, responsible for setting everything in motion. Clara said no, that she had cut ties completely, that the last time she heard her voice was the day she confronted her, demanding that she disappear from her life. He said he didn't scream or cry, he just spoke firmly, "You won, but I survived. Now you're going to disappear." His daughter listened without blinking. She didn't praise, she didn't forgive, she just absorbed it. And that, for Clara, was already a lot. Meanwhile, Daniel was living quieter days. Mariana was traveling for work and her absence revealed a series of feelings that he had not yet named. It was not dependence, nor longing in the romantic sense, but a kind of restless peace, like someone who realizes that they no longer need someone to feel complete, but still wants to share the journey. He took advantage of that time to reflect, reorganize things in the house, and reconnect with some old contacts. He met up with a distant cousin who worked restoring antique furniture, and ended up getting involved in the project of restoring an old desk that he had inherited from his grandfather. He spent hours sanding wood, replacing hinges, and carefully painting, as if the piece of furniture were a silent metaphor for what he himself was trying to rebuild inside. When Sophia saw him leaning over the desk, she would ask if he was tired. He would say no, that it was the only place where time seemed to obey his will. One of those afternoons, sitting on the living room floor among tools and pieces of wood, Sophia said something that caught him off guard. She said that, some time ago, when she saw the messages on her mother's cell phone, she thought about telling him everything, but decided against it. He said he didn't want to be responsible for destroying anything, even if what was there was already cracked. Daniel stopped what he was doing, looked at his daughter and, with tears in his eyes, said he understood. That she was just a little girl trying to protect her own idea of love. That he would never expect her to take on the burden of fixing or destroying a marriage. Sophia replied that she didn't feel guilty, but that she had learned, the hard way, that silence can also be a choice with consequences. Daniel pulled her into a hug and they stayed there, breathing together, trying to name feelings that sometimes only time can decipher. Clara, at the same time, decided to change her lifestyle. She began giving small painting classes to children at a nearby cultural center. She wanted to occupy her time with something that required lightness, that would make her believe again that she could still offer some beauty to the world. In the early days, she felt out of place, like an outsider in her own attempt to start over. But little by little, she became enchanted by the spontaneity of the little ones, by their clumsy strokes that said more than many adult speeches. A girl named Isabella, only 7 years old, said to her one morning, "You paint as if you were trying to cry with the colors." Clara laughed, and then felt a lump in her throat. No one had ever described her pain so simply. She realized then that, even without wanting to, her art was beginning to touch other lives. And that, somehow, saved her a little more each day. Mariana returned from her trip with simple gifts for Daniel and Sophia. She brought a small soapstone sculpture and a rare book of short stories for him, and for Sophia, a colorful handmade scarf. Their reunion was gentle. There was no euphoria, just a quiet joy, the kind of presence that is established when two people know they don't have to prove anything. That night, Mariana and Daniel spent hours talking about choices, fear, and courage. She told him about an old love she had let go of for fear of getting hurt, and about how she had learned, over the years, that not loving for fear of suffering is a very subtle form of loneliness. Daniel listened attentively, and silently squeezed her hand. He simply said that now he understood what it meant to love with both feet on the ground and one's heart exposed. One weekend, Clara organized a small exhibition at the cultural center, with the children's work and some of their paintings. She invited a few people. Sophia was one of them. Her daughter showed up late in the afternoon, wearing a loose coat and with curious eyes. She walked among the paintings, smiled at some of the children's drawings, and stopped in front of her mother's work, the red line painting. Next to it, there was another, more recent one, with softer tones, blues and yellows intertwined. Clara approached and said that it was a representation of hope, of reconstruction. Sophia commented that she seemed less suffering. Clara said that it was because now she was learning to live with what she felt, and no longer to run away from it. Sophia hugged her, briefly but firmly. It was the gesture that Clara had been waiting for months, and had not asked for. It was a permission. Small, but real. One night, Daniel went out with Mariana for dinner at an intimate restaurant. They talked about future trips, about the possibility of spending a holiday together in another city. Mariana suggested that Sophia go too, and Daniel hesitated for a second. Not out of doubt, but out of respect. He said that he needed to talk to his daughter first, understand her limits, respect her time. Mariana understood. And she said that she was in no hurry, that the important thing was to build something real, not something perfect. The waiter interrupted with the wine. Daniel raised his glass and said that, for the first time in a long time, he felt that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Mariana toasted him, and in that silence, something was sealed between them. Not an eternal promise, but an alliance of presence. On the way home, Daniel found an envelope at the front door. It was from Clara. Inside was a handwritten letter. She said she didn't expect a reply, nor a new beginning. She just needed to thank him. For being the man he was, the father he still was, and the silent strength that made her realize that you don't love someone only when everything is going well, but especially when you choose not to destroy the other person, even in the face of pain. He said that the love hadn't ended, but had changed shape. And that, as strange as it seemed, it was now a cleaner love, stripped of expectations, free. Daniel read it all and then put the letter in a drawer. Not with sadness, but with the respect that one gives to something that was once very important. In the following weeks, life went on more smoothly. Sophia decided to spend an entire weekend with her mother, something she hadn't done in months. They painted together, cooked, and watched old movies. It was a reunion of souls, more than of routines. Clara, seeing her daughter sleeping on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, felt that perhaps she could still be a loving presence, even if in another form, another role. No longer the idealized mother, but the mother she could be. And that, now, was enough. Daniel, in turn, began planning a short trip with Mariana and Sophia. A quiet coastal city, with long days and silent nights. When he saw Sophia excited about the idea, he felt that something new was truly being born. And that, finally, the past had found its place, not forgotten, but reshaped. A closed chapter that now left room for the new. But beneath it all, there was still something to come. Something that would bring to the surface not new pain, but closure. Something that would reveal, with precision, the value of choices made and the price of living with truth or lies. Because every story needs an ending, but only some have the power to leave a legacy. And this one was about to do just that. On the morning they set off on their trip to the coast, Daniel woke up earlier than everyone else. He sat on the couch, still in the silence of the house surrounding everything around him, and stayed there, staring at the light filtering through the curtains, feeling his heart beat with a serenity he had not experienced in a long time. Beside him, his suitcase was packed, the ferry tickets and a framed photo of Sophia when she was still young, sitting on his shoulders, smiling as if she had not yet learned the nuances of pain. Mariana slept in the room with Sophia, who had asked to spend the last night there before they left. At that moment, Daniel understood that he had closed a cycle, not by chance, but by choice. The pain no longer burned, it only whispered memories. He got up, made coffee and woke them both up with a light kiss. They smiled, and in that silent gesture was confirmation that love, despite everything, still found ways. The trip was peaceful, with brief stops, unpretentious conversations and an atmosphere of natural complicity. In the seaside village where they stayed, they rented a modest wooden house with large windows and a balcony overlooking the sea. Sophia was enchanted by the rusticity of the place, Mariana immersed herself in reading in the shade of the trees, and Daniel took advantage of the time to walk barefoot on the sand. At night, they had dinner by candlelight, and the sound of the sea served as the soundtrack to a new life that finally seemed possible. On one of those nights, while they were watching the stars, Sophia asked her father if he was happy. Daniel looked at her tenderly and said that he didn't know if it was happiness in the traditional sense, but that for the first time, he didn't miss anything. Sophia then said that perhaps this was true peace. Mariana, listening, held his hand firmly. The silence that followed was the deepest they had ever shared, not because they were at a loss for words, but because everything had already been said. Meanwhile, Clara received the news of the trip through a message from Sophia. Her stomach sank for a second, but she soon took a deep breath. She had already accepted that she had lost that space. Not as punishment, but as a consequence. She continued to teach at the cultural center, and one of her paintings had been invited to an exhibition in another state. She declined the invitation, not because of insecurity, but because now she wanted to continue being small, discreet, present where there were still things to be rescued. On Sunday, while walking through the park near her home, Clara saw a scene from afar that had a profound impact on her. An elderly couple was walking hand in hand, laughing at something they seemed to share only with their eyes. She stopped, without realizing it, and cried. Not out of pain, but out of understanding. What she had destroyed in her marriage was not just a marital bond, but the possibility of one day reaching that age with someone who knew her flaws and still chose to stay. She cried for the future she would never have again. But even so, he returned home and finished a new painting, perhaps the most serene one he had ever painted. In the following days, something inside Daniel changed. He spent more time writing. He started a diary, not to record what he was experiencing, but to talk to himself. Mariana encouraged him, saying that sometimes, writing was the best way to not get lost along the way. And it was through writing that he came to the most important conclusion of all: he was no longer a wounded man. He was a transformed man. And with that, a new decision emerged. At the end of the trip, back in the city, Daniel invited Mariana to go for a walk in the park where it all began. They took Sophia along. They walked, laughed, and at the end of the walk, he looked her in the eyes and said that he no longer wanted to live divided between what was and what could be. He said that he wanted to build something new, without fear, with dedication. Mariana, visibly moved, replied that she had been waiting for this moment without expecting anything. And yes, I wanted it. I wanted everything, but only if it was true. They hugged and, without saying anything else, sealed the beginning of a new chapter. Sophia, watching the scene, did not feel jealous or uncomfortable. She felt relief. For the first time, she saw her father whole and with someone. Not as a survivor, but as someone who chose to live. On the way back, in the back seat of the car, she sent a message to Clara, saying, "You were the first woman in his life, but she is the one who is with him now. I just hope you are okay." Clara responded with a simple, "I am. Thank you for telling me that." And that, although brief, had the weight of closure. Not of contempt, but of respect for what each one represented in that girl's life. A few days later, Sophia went to her mother's studio and asked to take one of the paintings to her room. Clara asked which one. She pointed to the one with the red line. She said she wanted to remember the pain, yes, but also the transformation. She wanted to look at it and know that it was possible to be a different person after the fall. Clara carefully handed over the painting and said she hoped that one day her daughter would no longer need that reminder. Sophia replied that the day she forgot would be the day she stopped learning. And learning was what she wanted most. On Daniel's birthday night, Mariana prepared an intimate dinner at home. She invited only Sophia and two close friends. The house was different, alive with laughter, background music, and the smell of wine and herbs wafting through the air. During the toast, Daniel gave a short but powerful speech. He said he had lost a lot in the past few years, but that he had learned something essential: love is not an eternal promise, it is a daily choice. And that sometimes you have to lose everything to understand what really matters. Sophia hugged him tightly, Mariana cried silently. It was the end of one cycle. And the beginning of another. That same night, Clara was home alone, but at peace. She was painting barefoot with a cup of tea by her side. The phone rang. It was a message from an old college friend inviting her to take part in an art project. Clara didn't know if she would say yes, but she read the message as a sign that there were still paths to be taken. Not the ones she had envisioned, but others, more honest, more solitary perhaps, but more her own. And so, each of them found their place. Daniel followed Mariana's side, not to erase the past, but to write a new one. Sophia, mature beyond her years, carried within her the wisdom of someone who has seen love crumble, but also be reborn. And Clara, alone but whole, discovered that the greatest forgiveness she could receive was the one that came from within. A forgiveness that did not erase her mistakes, but transformed them into learning. She did not rebuild the family, but rebuilt herself. And that, in the end, was all that could still be saved. If you've made it this far, now I want to know, what did you think of this story? Tell us in the comments what was the most memorable moment for you, and how you see each of these characters. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, take advantage of it now and subscribe. Here, you'll find stories that go beyond the obvious, that move, surprise and make you think. This story showed that betrayal doesn't just destroy a relationship, it also destabilizes the foundation of a family, dismantles bonds, destroys trust, undermines self-esteem and echoes through generations. No excuse can erase the pain of someone who has been betrayed. Betrayal teaches, but at a very high cost. Let it serve as a warning, as a mirror, as a choice. And remember, This channel will never support any kind of cheating. Here, we tell stories to show the real damage it causes, not to romanticize it, but to highlight its true cost.